Welcome and thank you for standing by. Currently, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Today's webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be posted publicly. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. Now I'd like to turn the call over to your host for today, Rochelle Hill.
Thank you. Welcome to the FSRDC presentation series. For our presentation today, we have Dr. Lu Yang, who is an associate professor in finance at the Smith School of Business at the University of Maryland. She is also the executive director of the Federal Statistical Research Data Center at the University of Maryland. She is an active FSRDC researcher with experience on many FSRDC projects. Today, we will be getting a sneak peek on some preliminary work from one of her previous FSRDC projects. She and her co-author are currently working on the working paper, but this is a work in progress that she'll be sharing with us today. Following Dr. Lu Yang's presentation, there will be an opportunity for questions. You can submit questions in the chat at the end, and at the end of the presentation, Dr. Yang and her collaborator will be able to answer them. Dr. Yang, for simplicity's sake, I will read the questions and then you can answer them. Without further ado, I'm going to turn our presentation today over to Dr. Yang. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Rochelle. Thank you for this opportunity to present our work to a wider audience. This is very early work. I wanted to emphasize that. We received our first round of results disclosed by Census at the end of last year. So what I'm presenting today is our preliminary interpretations of the empirical findings we obtained. I have my co-author, Professor Vyacheslav Maximovich here. Both of us are from the University of Maryland. Max and I are financial economists who are new to this research topic. So we sincerely welcome your comments and suggestions to help us better interpret our results and frame our research. The usual disclaimer applies. This reflects the views of ours and not Census Bureau, and the results have been reviewed by Census for distribution. In the past 50 years, union membership has steadily declined, with about 10% of the workforce currently enrolled as members for labor unions. However, there has been a recent surge towards organized labor from traditional organizations like UAW to new generation of companies like Amazon and Starbucks. At the same time, multiple states have recently passed laws, right-to-work laws, that reduce unions' power, while the current federal administration has been pushing really hard for union. Most of the discussion of unionization in the literature focuses on its impact on labor cost, and much less is understood about how unionization affects the incentives within the firm. We know from many studies that incentives are effective in addressing moral hazard problems. With unions, however, the management's capacity to provide and implement incentive contracts can be constrained by labor agreements with the union. The rigidities of union system, including fixed wage and wage compression, can lead to unintended adverse outcomes. So in this paper, we take advantage of the census microdata to study the effect of unionization on incentives, using the plant level information for manufacturing industries. Specifically, we ask the following questions. How do incentives differ in unionized plants? What are the consequences? Are there any indirect effects? And lastly, can we draw causal inferences? We have 4 key findings. First, we find that unionized plants have lower incentives, especially for non-managerial employees who tend to be union members, in addition to paying higher wages and more generous benefits. We found that the lack of incentives leads to higher exit rate, lower investments, and lower growth. We identified two distinct effects. First, the lower incentives in union plans contribute to adverse outcomes. And second, incentives, even when they're in place, are less effective in promoting good outcomes in unionized plans. We call this the level effect and the sensitivity effect. We also see a significant spillover from union to non-union plans. We show that the non-union plans belong to the firms, the same firm as the union plans, also have lower incentives, lower investments, and lower growth. In the last section of the paper, we leveraged the recent enactment of right-to-work laws in Midwest states as shocks to unions' bargaining power to draw causal inferences. In line with the spillover effects identified in the cross-section, we also show that non-union plans associated with treated union plans also experience higher investment and growth following the shock, confirming the spillover effect. The effects are quite big. Using the plan level data, we show that labor share is 1.9% higher in unionized plants, controlling for firm, industry, and location fixed effects. This is about 1/3 of the profit margin in manufacturing industries in the US. We also see a substantial loss of output linked to union status. Union plants are 22% more likely to exit and have 39% lower sales growth compared to their non-union counterparts. We find that the lack of incentives, both in levels and effectiveness, account for about 75% of the union gap observed in survival and sales growth. Our paper is related to the extensive literature that studies incentive contracts in the presence of moral hazard problems and the research that examines the effect of unionization on labor cost, investment, firm performances, and various financial policies. Understanding the overall effect of unionization to all stakeholders is a very complex question. Here, we examine one specific aspect of it by looking at the role of incentives and the impact on investment and growth. As I said at the very beginning, we would love to get your feedback and suggestion, and to help us better interpret the results we're going to present and better frame our research. Our study used two main data sets from the Census Bureau. The first one is the plan level data from the Annual Survey of Manufacturers, ASM, and the Census of Manufacturers, CMF. As many of you know, ASM select a sample of plants and follow them for a 5-year panel. So we used the 2010 ASM panel, which has about 30,000 plants after we cleaned up the data. CMF covers all of those plants, but only in years ending with 2s and 7s. We're going to use CMF intermittently just to back check to make sure we can follow firms over a long period of time, even when they get out of the panel. We collect plant level information on wages, labor cost, investment, value of shipments, and various productivity measures from both ASM and CMF. We also take advantage of the unique identifier offered in Census dataset to track plants over time and also identify the ownership structure so that we can look at spillover effects within the same firm. Our second data source comes from the Management and Organizational Practice Survey, or MOPS. in the 2010 ASM supplement. We use MOBS to collect plan level unionization status and also incentives offered to managers and non-managers at the plan level. We use question 36 in MOBS to get an estimate for unionization level at the plant level. In our sample, about 20% of the establishments reporting having employees as labor union members, and about 13.3% have more than 60% of employees belonging to a labor union. In our main analysis, we identify plant as a union plant when it has any union membership. But all of our results go through if we restrict union plants to those with more than 60% of workers belonging to labor unions. The picture shows that there is a wide variation in unionization rate across the US in manufacturing industries. Unions are more popular in Midwest and less so in the South. We construct incentive measures from 8 questions in MOBS across 3 dimensions: bonuses, promotions, and dismissals, separately for managers and non-managers. For example, in the case of bonuses, we give a firm a higher score if a greater portion of workers receive performance-based bonuses, and those bonuses are based on workers' individual performance. Similarly, we assign higher scores to firms that provide performance-based promotions and swift dismissals following underperformance. So now let me share with you some of the results. In our first question, we ask how incentives differ in unionized plants. We run our regression at the plant level cross-sectionally based on the 2010 ASM. The dependent variable here measures the labor outcomes for plant P in firm F, industry I, and location L. We control for plant characteristics and the firm, industry, and location fixed effects. Our industries are defined at the 4-digit NAICS level, and locations are defined at the commuting zone level. We first confirms that union pays higher wages and offer more generous benefits. The 2 columns on the right includes firm fixed effect. So this shows that within the same firm, same industry, and same location, union workers receive 4% higher hourly wages and 10% more benefits. The focus of this paper is to look at incentives, and that's what this table shows us. It presents the union difference in incentives along 3 dimensions separately for manager and non-managers. The white column shows the results for managers, while the gray column indicates results for non-managers. The first row of coefficients capture the difference between union and non-union plants. As we can see, union plants have lower incentives across all dimensions, and the effect is particularly strong in non-managerial incentives. In all 3 dimensions, the estimated coefficient for union is about 4 to 5 times as big for non-managers than for managers. Although the mean of incentive is higher for managers, this suggests that the bigger effect is on non-managerial employees who tend to be union members. The MOBS data is collected through survey. In this table, we utilize the administrative data to estimate the realized incentives. We include plant fixed effect and examine how wages respond to changes of productivity measured by value added, VA, divided by either total hours or total employees. The estimated coefficient then provides a measure of pay for performance sensitivity, or PPS. On average, wages tend to increase with higher productivity. That's the first row. The coefficient is positive, and so is the third row. However, the interaction between unions and productivity is negative. This suggests that union plants have lower pay for performance sensitivity, which indicates that less incentive compensation is used in unionized plants. Next, we evaluate the impact of reduced incentives used in union plants. For this exercise, we follow plants included in the 2010 ASM and check their status in 2017 using census. We first identify whether the plant still exists in 2017 by verifying whether there is a positive value of shipment in the 2017 CMF. We also cross-check with 2017 LBD to make sure there is a death flag if the plant disappears. Then for the surviving sample, we examine investments, changing in employment, and sales growth from 2010 to 2017. So all the numbers you're going to see are cumulative. First, we find that there is a strong negative effect of union on investment. Union plants have lower investments in both equipment and structure, controlling for plant characteristics and industry and location fixed effects. As we dig a little bit deeper, we realize most of the differences can be attributed to differences in wages, non-managerial incentives, and productivity measured by TFP. There are two effects here on incentives. First, non-managerial incentives tend to be lower in unions, while they also have a positive effect on investment. So this leads to lower investment in union plants. The second effect, and more importantly, a more important effect is that the connection between incentive and investment that exist in non-union plants no longer holds in union plants. We see that the interaction between union and non-managerial incentives is negative. If we combine these two coefficients, one from the main, the other from the interaction, the effect of incentives in union plants becomes almost zero. We observe similar results in exits and growth rate. We show that union plants have higher exit rates, lower sales growth, and lower employment growth. However, most of the differences can be explained by the differences in wage and incentives. The figure here shows the combined effect of incentives on outcome, divided into two components, the level effect in red and the sensitivity in blue. Together, the lack of incentives explain about 75% of the observed gap between union and non-union plants in exit, capital expenditure, employment growth, and sales growth. And between the two factors, the main factor underlying this gap is the reduced effectiveness of incentives in unionized plants. So again, there are two things going on. One, union plans have lower incentives, which help to promote investment. Second, even when incentives are in place in union plans, they seem to be less effective in promoting investments. So far, we've shown that unions have very different labor practices, which leads to some adverse outcomes. In the next segment, we're going to examine potential indirect effects by looking at non-union plans in the same firm of the union plans. The spillover analysis provides a broader estimate of the impact of unionization. And at the same time, it also helps us understand why unionized plans offer low incentives. We have two potential hypotheses. The first hypothesis is that the median non-managerial worker prefers low levels of incentives, and unions use their bargaining power to cater to that preference. If this hypothesis is true, then we would expect to see some spillovers, particularly for plants that are more familiar with those already unionized, as the firm chooses to adapt to prevent non-union plants from forming a union. We call it quiet life hypothesis. We use the term as an analog to the term used in the literature that argues that CEOs, under lack of a market for acquisition, threat pays higher wages and invests less in growth. The second hypothesis is that unions fight for lower incentives to limit management's power to make decisions so that they can increase their own bargaining power. We refer to this as the entrenchment hypothesis. Under this hypothesis, lower incentives are based on unions' preference, not the workers'. As such, we would not expect to see spillovers when union is absent. This is our empirical design. For each union plant in this figure, that's A1, we locate all other non-union plants operated by the same firm and group them by 4-digit NAICS industry. So in this picture, A2 is a non-union plant in a union firm and union industry, whereas plants B1 and B2 are non-union plants in a union firm outside of union industry. Similarly, we divide non-union plants by their location. So here we have A1 as the union plant, A2 as the non-union plant in union commuting zone, whereas B1 and B2 are plants, non-union plants operated by union firm, but outside of the union commuting zone. We estimate the spillover effects on wages and incentives using different categories based on the nature of the non-union plants. On this figure, we plotted out the coefficients estimated for spillover effects. The blue bar here, oh, by the way, we have 3 dependent variables. One is wage, the other one is managerial incentives, and the last one is the non-managerial incentives. The blue bar here represents the direct effect of unionization. We see that unions pay higher wages and have less incentives, especially for non-managerial employees. The 2 orange bars show the spillover effects by industry, with the darker bar representing non-union plants in union industry, and the lighter bar representing non-union plants outside of union industry. Similarly, the two green bars also represent the spillover effects, but by location. The darker one represents non-union plants within the union commuting zone, and the lighter one representing non-union plants outside of the union commuting zone. As we can see, there is a notable spillover to plants in the same firm. And the effect is much stronger for those within the same industry, that's the darker orange, or location, that's the darker green. When we look at exits growth, we found qualitatively similar patterns of spillovers. Our results on spillover effects aligned with the quiet life hypothesis, which suggests that the median workers prefer lower levels of incentives, and union leverage their bargaining power to accommodate that preferences. The spillover effect suggests that union plants will be more valuable to union than non-union acquirers in the market for acquisitions. This is consistent with the finding that non-union firms are less likely to acquire union plants. In case where only a minority of firms in an industry are unionized, union firms will participate in a much smaller segment of the market for acquisitions. We know from the literature that market for acquisitions is essential in motivating CEO and to curb moral hazard problems and agency problems. And a reduction in the size of that market is likely to lead to weaker corporate governance. On the other hand, our results suggest that the lower incentive is preferred by workers themselves. So the presence of a union within the firm creates externality for non-union workers as they receive partial benefits of union membership without paying the union dues. In the final part of our study, we leveraged the recent enactment of state-level right-to-work laws as natural experiments to examine the causal connection between unionization and outcomes. We select Indiana and Michigan as treated states since both passed right-to-work laws in 2012, and we choose nearby states with similar industrial makeup and unionization rate, including Wisconsin, Kentucky, Illinois, and Ohio as control states. Interestingly, Wisconsin and Kentucky adopted right-to-work laws after our sample period ended. So in our robustness checks, we included them as pseudo-treated states. We adopt a event study methodology to compare the effect of unionization between treated and control states in pre- and post-shock periods. Here's the timeline of our research. The union status was recorded in MOPS in 2010, while the right-to-work laws were passed in 2012 in treated states. We define 2012 to 2014 as the aftershock period, with 2014 being the last year of the 5-year ASM panel that began in 2010. We did it this way so we can track all of the firms continuously within this time frame. We chose 2007 to 2010 as the before shock period. Since 2007 and 2010, since 2007 is a census year, we can use CMF to locate firms included in the 2010 ASM panel. Our results are robust if we extend our sample to 2015, although that goes to a different panel and we lost some of the observations, or if we start from 2008. Consistent with our study in the bigger sample nationwide, we show that union plans are linked with lower employment growth and lower investments. However, for treated states where right-to-work laws were enacted, we observe a positive effect on union plans, indicating that the declining power of unions lead to an increase in investment and growth. When we look at the before period, we don't see the same trend. Additionally, when we use the pseudo-treated states, these are states that adopted right-to-work laws after our sample period ended, we did not observe any significant effect as seen in the treated states. In our earlier paper, we show that there are significant spillovers from union to non-union plans. If the adoption of right-to-work laws restricts the union's power, then we should expect that the spillover effects to be reduced as well. To carry out this analysis, we collect non-union plans operated by the same firm, but in other states. And then we compare non-union plans affiliated with union plans in treated or control states. We find that non-union plans affiliated with treated firms also experience higher employment growth and invest more in equipment. This confirms the causal effect of spillover. To summarize, in this paper, we use the census microdata to study the impact of unionization on incentives and outcomes. We show that union plans offer lower and less effective incentive contracts, especially for non-managerial workers who tend to be union members. We show that these two factors explain about 3/4 of the observed gap between union and non-union plans in terms of exit rates, investments, and growth rate. We also find a significant spillover effect from union to non-union plans, consistent with the quiet life hypothesis that unions cater to workers' preference using their bargaining power. The spillover may also lead to segmented acquisition markets and a weaker governance, which ultimately could reduce the value of union firms. We draw causal inferences on unions' effect on investments and growth by leveraging the recent passage of right-to-work laws in Midwest states. We find causal effect both directly and indirectly. With that, I wanted to end my presentation. We look forward to your suggestions and feedback. As I said at the very beginning, understanding the effect of unionization is a very complex and difficult task. Our study attempts to address one aspect of that around the ideal of incentives and its outcomes. And we really welcome your suggestion and feedback on to better interpret the results we already have and then better frame our research. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Yang. We appreciate your time and thought. Before we start the Q&A portion of this webinar, I want to remind folks that you can enter questions in the chat and I will read them aloud for Dr. Yang to answer. So moving into the Q&A portion,
Rochelle, if I
Yes.
could, I would like to introduce Wojciech Maksymowicz, who's a professor at University of Maryland, who's also my co-author on this project. And Max is here with us in the virtual room. So I wanted to say hi to Max, and Max will also chime in to answer questions together with me.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for the introduction. So moving into the question, the first one we have is the only outcome you examine productivity. Do you know or think that unionization might impact other outcomes such as workplace injuries or increased work satisfaction?
That's correct. As we said it explicitly, I hope multiple times throughout the presentation that we're looking at one aspect. This is how incentives affect investments in unionized plants.
Great, thank you. Do your results suggest that unionized workers are paid above their marginal product?
That is a tricky question. All we can say based on our results is that union workers are paid more than their non-union counterparts. We show even within the same firm, industry, and location, their hourly wage is 4% higher and their benefits are 10% higher.
Thank you. Could the difference in capital expenditure and investment be related to management divesting from union plants to non-union plants?
I see Max is nodding, so I'll let Max answer that question.
I think that is very likely. That is one possible channel by which this is happening. It's not necessarily the only one, because I think that the incentives have an independent effect on top of the profit maximizing channel, which would make managers of firms disinvest from unionized plants as well.
Yeah. One thing I also wanted to mention is that when we look at this experiment of right to work, right, this is, I think reasonably we can believe that this is exogenous to the plant's decision and choices. And when we see that, we also see the investment go up, meaning that there's when there is weaker bargaining power of unions, that drives the investment in those affected states.
Great. So we have a few questions about your method. So what are the mix of industries present in your data set?
What is, I'm sorry, I missed
the mix of industries. What is represented in your data set?
We used the annual survey of manufacturers and census of manufacturers. So our sample only includes manufacturing industries.
Wonderful. Forgive me if as I scroll through the questions here, make sure we're answering them as we go. Do you intend to review other data sources or studies beyond the manufacturing and associated data with the ASM?
We would love to if we have a good estimate of unionization status and coverage at the plant level. One of the motivation for us to start this research is the availability, right, of union status at the plant level. If someone knows good data sources to capture unionization level in other industries, please let us know. We would be happy to extend our studies.
Does the firm's opinion on unionization drive their choices with regard to offering incentives?
That is a very good question. What we are thinking is the resulting incentives we observe comes from the bargaining between union and the firm. And of course, firm is one of the players in this decision-making process. So I think so. And it would be interesting to sort of capture that. If there's a way to capture firm's attitude towards a specific union at a specific establishment, that would be something really interesting to us. And if you know anything like this, please let us know.
Okay, we have a question about what you mean by investment. Do you mean investment by a firm in their plants or investment in firms by external investors?
So to answer this question, first, let me tell you how we measure investment. For those of you, I bet there are many on this webinar who knows ASM and CMF. So we collect the capital stock on equipment, on structure, on other things at the plant level, and we use a certain depreciation schedule, account for that, and look at how capital stock has changed. And this gives us the investment level. So to answer that question, in a short answer, yes, these are physical capital expenditure on equipment and structure.
Okay, great. What would you say are the practical implications of these findings for industry, or how could industry take advantage of these findings?
I think one of the sort of big issues that we're raising is the effect of incentives within firms and within plants. And I think at least on the academic business school side, there's been a lot of attention being paid to incentives of managers and shareholders and so on. And I think we need to focus much more on the incentives throughout the organization. And so I think maybe more attention to structuring incentives within a unionized framework that can actually be incentive compatible for everybody might actually pay off quite a lot for firms.
Okay. If union workers are paid more than their non-union counterparts, wouldn't that suggest that management would be rationally motivated to invest more in the union factory to cut labor costs?
Well, it goes both ways. They may invest more relative to the amount of labor, but they may cut the whole level of investment. So then the plant may grow less fast and have fewer workers, but relative to the number of workers, they may put in more investment. And I think we're finding some preliminary results in that direction, that actually some of the unionized plants have a higher capital labor ratio than the non-unionized plants.
Did you explore any measures to proxy plant or firm strength or orientation toward unions? Is it possible that plants that are more able to resist union demands are also more likely to offer incentives or wage increases?
The short answer is we don't have a measure for firms' attitude towards union. It would be very useful to us if we, can, measure those things. And I would imagine that this is a game, right, played between the union and the firm. So the attitude towards each other probably will lead to dispersion in outcomes. But so far, we don't have any measures for that.
I think that getting a measure for attitude towards unions of a particular plant management is going to be a little tough. One could, if I wanted to, proxy for those things by looking at the contributions to different political parties and so on, but we have not gone in that direction.
On a related question, can you capture a firm's opinion on unionization by looking at how they reallocate resources after unionization or after right-to-work legislation is passed?
That might be something that we can explore a bit more. It's the, as Max said, I didn't get a chance to show that result, but we show that when incentives is weak and the wage is high, firms tend to have higher capital labor ratio. So capital labor ratio and the change of it around right to work, I think would give us some idea to answer the questions you just raised.
Okay, great. So there are a lot of questions coming up about causality because the dependent variables may be confounded by the interests of capital. I wonder if you could explore other dependent variables that capture worker quality of life that can be related to productivity. For example, there are studies in South Korea that show unionized environments have lower rates of disability than non-union, even when wages and healthcare access are equal.
I think those are very fair points, and I think that is correct. We've started looking, being from business school background, we're looking at the first indicators we have access to, but in other work, we were looking at, for example, the effect of NAFTA on accident rates and so on. There's some work on that, and we're studying those papers and seeing whether they might also, that methodology might also apply to this kind of work.
All right. We continue to look down this list of questions. If you give me 1 second. So there is interest in seeing more document of the methodological details of the causal analysis for 1, the methods of production of the reported standard errors for 2, and other methods of uncertainty quantification employed for these analysis as a 3rd point. So something to keep in mind as you're preparing your working paper.
Those are great points. We are in the middle of finishing. We have a draft, but it's not ready for circulation yet. We hope that we'll be able to put the draft on SSRN in a few weeks. And I'm happy to share the link of the paper once that's there. Just very quickly, the standard errors are clustered by industry times commuting zone.
Okay. Is there any data to show productivity level change and how it impacts climate change issues and other similar things?
I would love to hear from the person who asked the question, like what is the non-hypothesis in the speaker's mind in terms of how we think climate risk and union would interact and affect decisions. It's not clear to me yet what is the channel, but I'm sure there is one. And please, if you would like to send us an email, please let us know. It's something that definitely worth thinking of.
Okay. There's a question about whether or not unionization improves sustainability.
I don't have any prior at this time. It will go one way or the other, but I would love to learn more.
Okay. Next, regarding the connection between incentives and investment, might other channels of labor productivity, other channels be through labor productivity and the share of profits captured by labor, both of which would leave less firm income available for investment?
From the cash flow perspective, that is true. But if this is a good investment opportunity, the firms can raise money, right, to fund the investment.
All right. I have a question. If either of you could explain the quiet life hypothesis one more time.
Well, I think that the intuition here is that the workers may actually prefer to have a sort of stable income, less stress dependent on firm outcomes, or even their own performance or accidental missteps along the way, and that they will that kind of set of incentives that goes along with that may not be optimal necessarily for the firm's point of view. So to the extent that workers would like that, they may get a union to help them achieve that, even at the cost perhaps of not getting as big as raises necessarily from the union collective bargaining, but trading off some of the higher wages, but potentially for incentives which are softer in many ways. And that comes as a literature in finance dealing with incentives of actually top managers and CEOs. And there is a lot of evidence that CEOs react very differently in response to differences in state laws on business takeovers and mergers. And the idea that when these laws are put into place, that makes mergers, takeovers more unfriendly, hostile takeovers more difficult, that CEOs tend to actually change the way firms change the way the CEOs are paid and reduce the incentives in many ways. So by analogy, we're also looking at that from the point of view of the worker.
There's also a question about lessons from companies that have engaged in potentially dangerous or fraudulent activities, and what incentives can lead, how that might be related to the outcomes that you see here. Does that question make sense? I realize that there might be some.
Can you clarify it a bit?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's not a very long question, but what kind of lessons you can learn from companies that have engaged in fraudulent or dangerous behaviors, and how that might be related to productivity? And if that's not clear, I can move on to another question.
I don't think we have evidence on that in this paper at this time. Yeah, I mean, the issue would also be identifying enough such companies and getting a big enough sample so they would be able to get statistical significance on that. But if the questioner has some ideas as to what we might be able to do in a more specified way, I'd love to hear them.
Thank you. Another question about right to work laws that may make businesses less competitive on a global scale. Do right to work laws starve unions of funds?
I am not aware of any empirical evidence that shows that the passage of right to work laws is linked to like less of a competitive edge for US firms. I'm not aware of any study.
Okay. All right. I believe that might be the questions that we have time for at this time. Would either of you like to add anything in conclusion?
Just to say, Mike tried just to say that these questions have been very, very helpful. If any of the questioners or someone else has some ideas on something we might have missed or some direction we might be interested to go in, we'd love to hear them. And please email us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Likewise, thank you so much for listening to our work. And if you have any suggestions and comments, please send them our way. We would love to, or if you have a question we didn't get a chance to address, please contact us. We'll be happy to hear from you.
Great. Before we wrap up today, I just want to state that the research here presented today is not specific to unions in the federal government, which are covered under FLMRS Chapter 71. And that management and the union operate in partnership here at the Census Bureau that benefits the mission of the organization and its employees. Thank you, everyone, for participating and joining us today for our presentation. If you have an interest in participating in the FSRDC presentation series in the future, please reach out to your local administrator. I'm sure they would be able to assist you in that. So thank you so much, and we'll be signing off at this point. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.